From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
After Governor Gina Raimondo took over, she cleaned house, but a few Lincoln Chafee holdovers remained, including Department of Environmental Management Director Janet Coit. She's responsible for some of the state's most valuable tourism assets, including state beaches and the newly renovated Fort Adams in Newport, which just hosted this, the Volvo Ocean Race. Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, DEM Director Janet Coit. Then, remembering Pawsox co-owner Jim Skeffington and what his passing means to his passion of keeping the team in Rhode Island. A reporter's roundtable on the second half of Newsmakers. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Director, welcome to the program. It's really good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk about budget first with the Department of Environmental Management. The proposed state budget has $10 million less than what was passed last year by the General Assembly. Where are those cuts going to come from?
Well, it's difficult always to deal with cuts, and and tough choices have to be made. A lot of the cuts that you see in this year's budget are a factor of not having as many capital projects going. You just showed a clip of the Volvo Ocean Race. We had quite a few capital projects that were in last year's budget. Some of the cuts have to come from just very careful penny pinching, and that's difficult when you have a budget that's mostly personnel costs.
So when people hear capital projects, should they be hearing there that probably fewer improvements to things like Fort Adams or other state parks, or aren't those big money improvements that we've seen in the past?
Right. So we do them over a period of years and carefully. One large project at a time.
I'm curious how much you asked for in your initial budget to the governor.
Well, we were instructed to put in what's called a constrained budget. So I actually asked for about what they're giving me, given that even though we would all like to have a lot more resources, we're dealing with the reality that we have.
There's already been criticism. Save the Bay, which has been raising concerns for a number of years now about the DEM budget, said recently, quote, over the past decade, staffing in these offices has been whittled down, leaving the agency unable to provide timely and fair enforcement of environmental rules, giving businesses that fail to comply with environmental laws an economic advantage over businesses that follow the rules. Do you agree?
Well, there's no question but that we have fewer workers and a smaller budget than we had 10 years ago. So that's meant that we've had to be very smart about aligning resources and improving processes. So like any department director, I would love to have more staff to do enforcement and compliance and technical assistance, but I'm really proud of what we are doing, which is improving business processes, improving customer service, and we have the capability to carry out huge events like the Volvo Ocean Race, and just have to be very, very strategic about our enforcement priorities.
The governor is asking the General Assembly in this year's budget for an additional $4 million for the DEM. Is that overspending in the department, or is the budget a little heavier than you anticipated?
I'm sure you're aware that last year's budget included cost of living adjustment increases and an increase in the minimum wage, both of which weren't provided for.
But when people hear cost of living, a lot of people think retirees, COLA, pension. Yeah. This is the raise that everyone got for current employees, right. Which you have about 400, right?
Correct.
All right.
Slightly under that. But the previous administration negotiated these increases. The budget didn't include additional revenues, and then in 1 year's time, all the departments had to absorb those additional costs. And DEM also has 500 seasonal workers, which make minimum wage. So we had a couple cost increases on the personnel side without much time to make those adjustments. So at the moment, we're still showing that we're likely to operate this year, close out this year in the red, and that's of course difficult.
I want to switch gears. Just this week, Senator Whitehouse down in Washington made his 100th weekly speech calling attention to climate change. And I'm wondering, DEM, it's a huge topic, climate change, but for you, what's the #1 priority at DEM policy-wise for dealing with climate change around, for adapting or for making the state prepared for rising oceans and the rest of the effects scientists say are coming?
The #1 priority, and I also chair the state's Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, is making people aware in particular of the vulnerabilities of a coastal state. So we've already seen 10 inches of sea level rise at the Newport tidal gauge. and we're seeing that combined with storm surge really affecting our coastal communities when it comes to flooding. So we're trying to get the message out and then have people take practical, specific approaches to rebuilding infrastructure or development that will keep people safe. Because we know that we're going to see sea level rise and increased storms. We're having actually 10 inches more of rain each year than we had 100 years ago.
Consistently?
Consistently.
Do you think we need to scale back on waterfront construction?
It makes sense to use natural areas to absorb floodwaters, and you'll see whenever there's a storm, those are the areas that buffer and recover most quickly. So I think we need to do it with appropriate height restrictions, and yes, staying out of vulnerable areas that Mother Nature is going to claim.
Like what? I wonder if there's an area that is of particular concern to you in Rhode Island. When you think about sea level rise, when you think about storm surge and that massive amount of rain that you just talked about there.
Well, there's two things I think you're talking about. One is trying to protect or move development out of areas, and another is areas that are heavily developed and we're already seeing flooding.
Right.
And the one example that comes up a lot is that Matunic area, where you have a combination of erosion, sea level rise, and then storm surge. That's meaning you're seeing, beach houses and establishments actually needing to move out of harm's way.
And I want to talk about state beaches, actually. Memorial Day weekend, you're opening state beaches. It's a little chilly. The forecast looks to be a little chilly. We tape on a Friday, but I don't know if a lot of people are going to be out there. It was a bruising winter. And I'm wondering if there was any serious damage to the beaches or any of the facilities that the DEM manages.
No, so first, we welcome all visitors, and we're so proud of our world-class beaches. And we are gearing up, and I think after this long, cold winter, you'll see a lot of people out regardless of how warm it is. But no serious damage at our facilities. Everything's in very good shape, and we're eager to have people coming and enjoying the coast. It's huge, obviously, for our tourism sector, and so DEM plays a really important role in that.
I want to stick with state beaches. A year ago, Channel 12 did a report that a Connecticut parking company, ProPark, made out pretty well when Governor Lincoln Chafee raised state beach parking fees. The report raised questions about how the contract was structured. So the business made more money, but the town sort of took it on the chin. And we also asked why the contract wasn't reopened. I understand you have re-signed with ProPark. Was the contract changed?
Yes. So fair criticism, the old contract had a percentage amount. So if the amount of revenue collected increased, the amount to the vendor increased. The new contract, which we just signed, fixes that problem. It's a fixed fee-for-service contract. So if revenues increase, those increases will go to the state.
Okay, I got it. And how long is that contract? Because I think the last one was 5 years, right?
Correct. This one is 4 years. It does. I pared back the length of time, but it does make sense to not have to go out to bid every year for these things. There's considerable infrastructure and know-how, so that seemed to be a good period.
Do you have
of
a lot of companies looking for this, or are there few parking companies that actually can tackle a project like this?
I was surprised when we did the opened the bid. Lots of people expressed an interest, lots of companies, but only 2 bid on it.
Okay.
So not as many as you'd think.
The other bidding that's been in the news was the beach concession stands. We saw a lot of concerns around state representatives being involved in getting those contracts. Have you done any sort of review of how those are awarded? Was anything done incorrectly in that process that's been changed?
So the state purchasing office handles those contract processes, and until they open these sealed bids, you don't know who the bidders are. So in that process, for example, no one would have known about an inappropriate bidder until the bids were opened. So I think there's been a lot of effort to further broadcast who's eligible and who's not, so that you won't have a situation where someone who's not supposed to be bidding is taking that action.
I want to switch gears with a minor question about the proposed ballpark in downtown Providence. We're going to talk later in the show about the late Jim Skeffington. He often said that he was excited to put the ballpark by the river because the baseballs would fly out into the river if there was a good home run. Would they need to get a permit for that?
So marine debris is a serious issue, and even if your question seems fairly
It's bizarre.
goofy.
Yeah, it's okay. You can say
You can admit it. I know.
Okay.
So,
Ted asks a lot of goofy questions.
So I'm glad. I mean, we really are focused on trash and debris that comes off the land and trying to prevent it in our waterways. I I hate to speculate, but I can't imagine in that instance needing a permit for the eventuality that from time to time someone would hit one out of the park.
Those people who think the state is overregulated are
You're not going to go after the ballpark on that one. Okay.
I told Ted I wanted to ask you about the Volvo Ocean Race, mainly because Channel 12 gathered all this great video of the race, and it was just an excuse to play it on this program. But the state did put $9.9 million into Fort Adams State Park, and that helped host the Volvo Ocean Race down in Newport. Is it possible to calculate the economic benefits for events like this? You know, in other words, was that $10 million worth it? And I know you're going to say yes, but right, because absolutely not. But how can you show us that events like this actually help the economy in Rhode Island?
So the governor talks all the time about sparking an economic comeback, and I think as the director of DEM that having events like the Volvo Ocean Race, where we had we just got the new numbers, over 130,000 people came to that event over the period of 9 or 10 days.
Was it mostly Rhode Islanders?
No, it was people from all over. As you talk to people flew in, took a train from New York. They were from all over other countries. So the investments in that park helped to host an event of this magnitude. We had over 20,000 people there in one day. They're not just for around the world sailing events. We had the tall ship there. They help improve the iconic jazz and folk festivals in terms of having better infrastructure. So it is too early to know the economic impact. We know that over 8,000 hotel rooms were filled. We know that Rhode Island got PR and good publicity all over the world. So yes, you knew I would say yes. I think having infrastructure that can support large events and bring crowds and show off Rhode Island is a positive when it comes to tourism and economic benefit. And some of that is all the revenue that comes through the hotel rooms and the restaurants and the things people do when they're here. And hopefully they come back.
Protesters out in Burrillville are concerned, I'm sure you know, about the coming expansion of Spectra Energy's natural gas pipeline. I believe it's primarily federal regulation, but you are responsible for Rhode Island's environment. These opponents have said it will increase air and noise pollution. Are you worried about the effects of that project?
I totally respect the passionate people who are worried about the environment and have met with the protesters a number of times. Having said that, in terms of what we oversee and permit with the compressor station that's going to be the place that the gas comes to in the pipeline, we're not concerned about environmental impacts. We've taken a look at that, and it's not a big emitter of gases. So that project, unfortunately, Rhode Island needs more cheap energy. So I think that project is a good project. The environmental impacts aren't large
Now you were a well-known environmentalist outside of government before you took this job at DEM under Lincoln Chafee. I mean, does it pain you a little to have to admit that Rhode Island needs more natural gas, that it can't all be wind and solar, or do you think that's something environmentalists need to accept?
Well, I'm a very pragmatic person. We'd all love to see that Rhode Islanders only used renewable energy, and we're very proud of how well we're doing with energy efficiency, which is probably the smartest thing to do, just consume less. And I'm very proud that we're going to have the first offshore wind farm off the coast of Block Island.
Deepwater wind, yeah.
But right now, we do not have an alternative to natural gas. So it's necessary, definitely now and in the short term, to have those supplies if we're going to have a vibrant economy. And we're going to keep working to improve efficiency and promote renewables. But you have to play the hand you're dealt.
Agriculture. Rhode Island, you have a big Rhode Island Agriculture Day coming up May 28th. I think the first gentleman, Andy Moffat, is going to be involved in that one. It includes an announcement for a $230,000 grant. I assume that's a federal grant, correct?
No, actually. That's a state program, the Local Agriculture and Seafood Act grant program.
And what's the money going to be used for?
The money is going for a group of projects that help promote small farm businesses. They all from marketing seafood to promoting urban agriculture to improving infrastructure that farmers can share and use. This is the second year of that program, and it was intended, as you might imagine, federal commodity crop grants don't come to Rhode Island. So we have a lot of small farmers. We have a growing farm sector it's an area of great opportunity, and these grants will allow businesses to grow.
I was going to ask you about that. You say we have a growing farm sector. Are we seeing an increase in the number of farmers?
We are. We've seen over the last 12 years a 43% increase in the number of farms in Rhode Island, and tons of innovation as part of the local food movement, with people able to sell directly to the consumer and make a good return. And it's a growing sector in Rhode Island.
David Dedakian, who runs Eat Drink RI, has this effort he's making in Providence to do, I'm sure you know about it, a permanent market, outdoors, kind of like you see in other places, a public market. Is the state playing any role in trying to help him get that done? I know he won a Rhode Island Foundation award for it.
So we would love to see it, and we work closely with him and Farm Fresh Rhode Island and others who are promoting local food. So we have some ideas about ways that the state could support that effort with a venue for a year-round market and a food hub. So yes, we're working closely with him and the City of Providence. I met with the mayor about this just yesterday.
Oh. Director of the Department of Environmental Management, Janet Coit, thank you very much for joining us this week, and you're going into your busy season, so best of luck to you. And when we come back, we're going to be remembering Jim Skeffington and talk about what his passing means to the future of the Paw Sox. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. I'm joined by WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi. This week, Paw Sox co-owner Jim Skeffington passed away. Our condolences go out to the entire Skeffington family. His death was a shock to everyone in the state, but obviously no more so than his loved ones. He was a passionate guy, and you could tell he loved the state very much. And recently he joined us right here on Newsmakers, and I want to play some of that for you now. Here's Jim Skeffington when he was last on Newsmakers.
I envision, if you will, a warm evening or a warm Saturday afternoon, and people strolling about the city before the game, going to restaurants, bars, shopping in the mall and other stores, walking from the train station to the ballpark. It is not very far, you know.
You said you haven't talked to Larry Lucchino about it, but you like the name the Rhode Island Red Sox. So you said that at a press conference earlier this week. Yeah. Did he call you after that news conference and say, "Hey, whoa, slow down, Jim"? You know, we
talk almost daily.
Okay.
And he did mention rather jokingly. He said, "I see we have a new name for the team." I said, "No, we don't yet until we both agree on it. This ballpark isn't for city. It's for the state. You know, we're all Rhode Islanders, and this will be helpful for the state. So when you're living in Westerly, you don't want to be saying, "Oh, I'll go to see the Providence Red Sox." You want to see our Rhode Island Red Sox.
Jim Skeffington, right here on Newsmakers a couple of months ago. Ted, before the Paw Sox deal was announced, a lot of people thought they didn't know who he was, right? But in reality, they really did. You wrote a long profile on Jim Skeffington, and it seems like he was involved in just about everything.
Yeah, just about every major public-private project in Rhode Island. The vast Senate President Paiva Weed had a good line in her tribute to him. She said he changed the Providence skyline, and that is a good way to look at it. I mean, the Rhode Island Convention Center, Providence Place Mall, Rhode Island Housing, the EDC, getting Fidelity into Rhode Island, the G-Tech building. Jim Skeffington was involved in all these different projects as a lawyer, as you say, wasn't well known. Now, you know, to be fair, and Jim acknowledged it, that sometimes brought controversy with it. Public money was involved in a lot of these projects, bonds.
He was the father of moral obligation bonds, wasn't he?
Which led to 38 Studios eventually, not directly, but that was the vehicle used for it. So, and I think that is part of why there was so much resistance to the proposal, because people have seen things like, there's Patricia Morgan, the state rep, she's studying now how expensive the convention center authority has been to Rhode Island taxpayers. Now, Jim Skeffington still defends it as something necessary, good for Rhode Island. He would have that back and forth. But regardless of what you think about individual projects, no doubt the man had an immense impact on Rhode Island for the last 40 years and was extremely admired, even by his critics, for his tenacity, his abilities as a lawyer, and everything else.
Do you think he was caught off guard at all, or surprised by the level of pushback there was on that initial offer? And the initial offer is $120 million in public money over 30 years, and that was met very coldly.
Yeah, he used that, I think he said, a chilly response. He said, I think he was, you know, I don't want to speak for Jim, especially as the deceased, but talking to him in the last couple of weeks, especially, he seemed kind of miffed that people didn't just realize what a great thing this stadium would be and shouldn't get too hung up on the dollars and cents. And in fairness to him, I was having this conversation with someone the other day, you know, we do see nationally most minor league ballparks get a large public subsidy.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean Rhode Island has to do it,
right.
Jump off the bridge, that old saying. But I think there was surprise that the beloved Pawtucket Red Sox wouldn't just be met with a red carpet and whatever they need to build his dream of a stadium. So I think he was surprised by it and was, at the time of his death, trying to figure out how to recalibrate.
There's the irony here that 38 Studios had a lot to do with that, and that was a moral, as you point out, a moral obligation bond connection.
There's some real irony there.
One of the big questions is what happens to his stake in the team, right? It could, I suppose it could go to a family member, might want to pick up the mantle there, or another owner buys a share out. What do we know about the other owners?
Well, you did a good story Monday night, right after Jim passed. You talked to some sports economists,
yep.
and I know they said to you that the assumption, of course, is his heirs, his son and daughter, would inherit his stake. It'll be up to them, and obviously probably much too soon for them to decide what they're going to do with that. But the way Jim Skeffington had structured this deal, you had 5 owners with Rhode Island ties, more or less. Not just, you had him, you had Terry Murray and Tom Ryan, the former CEOs of CVS and Fleet, and 2 others. And then you had 5 more or less Massachusetts or Red Sox tied folks. Now not only have you lost one of your 5 Rhode Islanders, at least at the moment at the table, you've clearly lost your most passionate Rhode Island supporter.
And a principal owner, by the way.
And a principal owner with Larry Lucchino,
right.
the Boston Red Sox CEO. So I don't think we know yet exactly what the impact of that will be. I mean, Jim Skeffington wasn't exactly, bending over backwards to spend a lot of their money on this project without a big state subsidy, even though he loved the idea of a Providence ballpark. So it could be there isn't a huge change in the negotiating posture. But then there's the intangibles of how passionate he was about getting this done. Would he have pushed further, pushed his fellow owners?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, if he was, as one of those sports economists said, the people who want to keep the Paw Sox in Rhode Island lost someone who had the zeal, but also the connections, right? Mm-hmm. Statewide connections. But I think you could also look on it, as you just said, on the inside, someone that could possibly convince the owners mm-hmm. that, hey, look, this deal might not be as good for us for our bottom line. We might lose a little bit of revenue here, but it keeps the team in Rhode Island. That person on the inside isn't there anymore.
And the person you see taking his place is Larry Lucchino, again, the CEO, president of the Boston Red Sox. Obviously, he's gotten a lot of credit, deservedly, for the revival of the Red Sox, the World Series victories, the revenue increases at Fenway Park over the last decade. Yep. Flip side of that is Larry Lucchino is known as a bit of a tough customer, right? He negotiates hard. He's looking after the bottom line. He's not just a sentimental baseball lover. And so having Larry Lucchino at the table, perhaps he would more easily walk away.
You say he's not a sentimental baseball owner. Sure, he's a businessman and a savvy one, but I wonder if there is an emotional attachment there. Larry Lucchino and Jim Skeffington were very good friends.
That's a good point.
There might be a desire on his part to see this thing through, to make the Jim Skeffington Memorial Ballpark.
People have said that, and people, one thing we didn't mention about Jim Skeffington, he was general counsel to the Boston Red Sox.
Right.
One lawyer...
They talked every day, Jim Skeffington
Exactly.
said.
One lawyer close to Jim Skeffington, a younger lawyer who admired him greatly, said to me, Ted, think of how many Boston lawyers would have killed not for money, but for the connection, yes. And just to tell people, I'm general counsel to the Boston Red Sox.
Right.
I mean, that are the Patriots, and a few other groups. There's no more prestige.
Not the Patriots right now, definitely.
I don't want to be their lawyer at the moment. Good point.
All right, I need to shift gears here, as we just have a couple of minutes left, Ted. Other big political news: Mayor Jorge Elorza poked the hornet's nest this week, right, by proposing changes to platoon shifts for the fire department. It seems he's going down the same path worn by former Providence Mayor David Cicilline, that same path that he took, just angering the firefighters here. Do you think he could have announced this differently or taken different steps?
There's always options, right? And this is the one his folks chose. I presume they had a strategic rationale why they thought they just wanted to surprise the firefighters along with everyone else with the announcement this week. But there's already been quite a backlash. Our colleague Dan McGowan has a great piece I recommend it to everybody on WPRI.com, Inside the Battle, and how they were talking, Paul Dowdy, the firefighters union, regularly with the mayor and didn't come up, and then it came out yesterday. Now, one thing you've actually studied, right, what it actually means to switch, right? What is he actually proposing?
Well, so he wants to do 24-hour shifts, and a lot of times that is structured with having a firefighter work 24 hours on, 24 hours off, 24 hours on, and then usually a bunch of days off, and most of the time that is 4 days off. Paul Dowdy does bring up a point that I think is an important one, and I know reporters pushed Mayor Elorza on at the announcement, which is, okay, show us how that's going to save money. They say it's $5 million annually. You have to break that down. One of the big costs that come with shifts like that is overtime. If someone calls out sick, you're not just filling an 8-hour shift. You're filling a 24-hour shift, and that is going to be filled, if you have minimum manning, that is going to be filled with time and a half, either through 3 men on 8-hour shifts or an entire 24-hour shift. So I think it's right to be calling for seeing the X's and O's on that, the 1s and 2s.
So there's going to be policy questions and then, as you pointed out, political questions. I mean, David Cicilline, Joe Fleming, our analyst, pointed out to Dan McGowan in that PRI.com story, said, yeah, David Cicilline, it created a lot of headaches for him fighting with the firefighters. It wasn't always pleasant, but he hasn't lost an election since. So politically, maybe it's not as harmful as we think.
Ted Nesi from WPRI.com. I'm Tim White. If you missed any of the show, it's online, WPRI.com. Our thoughts are with those who lost their lives serving the country as we observe this Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe, everyone. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.